Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. NFL Week 18, playoff bids hanging in the balance, unfortunate circumstances that we saw unfold on the football field on Monday night. A lot of ground to cover on today's show. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, it's the cusp of the final weekend of the NFL regular season. Always bittersweet for a man of your passions, I assume.
It's really been a weird conversation. If you maybe asked me that 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, my response would have been a little different than it is now. We don't want it to end with how things are currently rolling, but this week's a little interesting. Difficult board to navigate, a lot of situational handicapping. If Y happens, then X probably is good. And I know we talked off air a lot. There's been some correlated parlay stuff going on just to kind of put those two ideas together, so to speak. But we'll try to navigate this as best we can. Certainly some situational things will play off. The league did us no favors playing games at all different times. They really screwed the pooch this week with where they've slotted some of these games. And then obviously some of the unfortunate stuff that unfolded Monday is still prevalent situation.
Yeah, and I think, not to gloss over that situation, feel it's been covered. Obviously, you and I are human at heart, and you want to see Damar Hamlin return to 100% capacity. No one ever wants to see that unfold on a football field, but we are a gambling podcast, and we'll preface it with that. Our job in all of this is to try and find an edge, and we break those games down a little bit later. Don't want to appear as callous, but we'll preface all of the dialogue that's coming as we look at things through the gambling lens. You mentioned the schedule, and obviously that's a lengthy discussion that we'll try and hit on for a lot of the games that we're going to highlight here.
You had one job.
Yeah, well, the league apparently does decide they want to give certain teams competitive bias when they try and stack these things, to say the least. But, all right, we'll kick things off Saturday afternoon, a game taking place right here in my backyard where the Chiefs and Raiders will do battle. Two familiar foes within the division. You're looking at Kansas City now a 9.5 point road favorite for their trip to Allegiant Stadium. Total on this game, 52.5. You've seen the side move all over the place, opened a little bit higher at 10, get down to 7.5 before there was some favorite money. You've seen two-way action on the total with a number that opened at 50, got as high as 53, and then started to tick back down. We can lay out the scenarios pretty straightforward and simply here. The Kansas City Chiefs are looking to secure home field with an eye on hosting their 5th straight AFC championship. A win here gives them the number 1 overall seed in the AFC. Meanwhile, the Raiders, they're currently slotted for 8th in the 2023 draft. If, depending on how things go this weekend, they can move up to the number 6 spot. They can move as low as number 10. And good things for the silver and black. Devontae Adams has said he wants to have a little bit of say in who the team could potentially bring in as their starting quarterback. And when you look at the Raiders, it has been truly a gut-wrenching campaign for them from top to bottom, Payne. They're the opposite of the Vikings. 9 one-score losses this season, tied for an NFL record. 5 losses when leading entering the fourth quarter, also tied for an NFL record. 5 losses with double-digit leads, tied for an NFL record. 0-4 record with double-digit lead at halftime. That is actually an NFL record that they hold entirely on their own. And 4 overtime games is one shy of tying the 1983 Green Bay Packers. Your boy Patrick Mahomes, however, though, will flirt with history on Saturday, and a couple of milestones very much in reach. 430 passing yards shy of Peyton Manning's NFL record, 54-77. With 186 combined passing and rushing yards, he can eclipse Drew Brees' NFL record of 55-62. And with 4 passing touchdowns, he can match Drew Brees' 195 that he produced during a 5-year span. I provide all of that to ask you the overarching question. Do either of these teams offer much in the way of resistance, or are we in for a good old-fashioned track meet on the fast track at Allegiant?
Yeah, I think you really hit a lot of interesting points there. At the top, probably the biggest, right? Some of that ping pong movement you referenced, and it's been both side and total. Right? I mean, there was over money at 50 and then plus 10 on the Raiders. And then we saw a group take under 53 Tuesday. And so both dipped to 7.5 and 51.5. And then Wednesday, movement back to 9.5 and 52.5. From a side perspective, plus 10's probably a good bet. And then when it got to 7.5, using KC as an advantage teaser leg down to 1.5, probably a good bet. So there's multiple ways to get your money in good. And this kind of is that overarching point that we talk about all the time jokingly, like not all professional bettors are huddled around the campfire singing Kumbaya. There was two ways to attack this, and they were a little bit different from both sides. I was more focused on the total. I hate kind of past posting or talking about games not at their current price, but I know, a lot of guys that you particularly and that get my intel when I will reference like, a group going on Monday. I don't necessarily reference it was us, and that apparently provides a chuckle. But, just kind of being forthright here, like we originated this over 50 move late Sunday night, early Monday morning, and I know Jarrett Stidham's performance baseline can't be last week's San Francisco game. That's virtually impossible. Stidham would basically lap the field multiple times for MVP because metrically he was as good as it gets if that were to be his baseline performance level.
Don't tell that to Raiders fans,
really
Payne. He's in line for a mega deal after one good performance. He follows it up here. Heaven help them. If they beat the Kansas City Chiefs, Raiders fans are going to be rolling out the red carpet to make Jarrett Stidham the face of the organization.
Well, I mean, it was that good of a performance. And, you're kind of insinuating that, there wasn't really any meaningful film on Stidham. And now there is that element there, right? The element of complete shock and surprise is probably a little bit gone. But I have to say, like, watching that game live and then watching it twice on replay and watching film guys discuss and then me matching it metrically, like, Jarrett Stidham was awesome. I mean, he was decisive. He was accurate, 12% over expectation with his completion percentage, best of any QB in Week 17. He was just in complete control of the offense. There wasn't a single turnover-worthy throw, and that was impressive to me because he wasn't babied, right? I mean, Stidham was willing to be aggressive. 11 intended air yards per pass attempt, tied for the second highest of the week. Nearly 24% of Stidham's pass attempts were 20-plus yards. He was throwing on the move. He was throwing with play action. They were rolling him out. He was using his legs, right? And defenses now have to account for that element of the Raiders' offense. That was something that really wasn't viable with Derek Carr under center. And then you're just looking at the playmakers. That was an area that we talked about at the onset of the season. Like, that is the Ferrari of this team, right? It's Adams, it's Waller, it's Jacobs, it's Renfro. Those are all plus skill position talent, and they're all healthy. And you're getting a Chiefs defense which is substantially worse than the 49ers, right? That's obvious. The Chiefs defense has actually been regressing through the air as well. 25th in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency since Week 13. We'll also have to keep our eyes peeled on L'Jarius Sneed, dealing with a little bit of a hip injury there after his interception this past week against the Broncos. But there were 2 games post-bye where KC was able to kind of camouflage some of their deficiencies. They got to play Malik Willis. They got to play Bryce Perkins. And the Chiefs defense has faced a bottom 5 schedule of offenses on the season overall. So it's not battle tested, and it's just trending poorly. So there's going to be some opportunities for the Raiders offense to have some real success here. And the spread indicates that they're going to be chasing, right? And there's an incentive for McDaniels to be aggressive and give Stidham the best chance for success possible, right? All of the post-game comments from Adams and Jacobs and Waller have been nothing but praise for Stidham, so the locker room believes in him, which is a question that we had going into last week with how beloved Derek Carr was, and I think we hit on this Monday that contractually, financially, the best situation for Mark Davis and Josh McDaniels is getting Stidham to prove himself to the likes of a Devontae Adams, who then came out, as you alluded to yesterday, saying he'd like to have his hand in the fire there with picking the quarterback. So it only helps if Stidham looks really good. And then, just quickly on the other side of the ball, to me, it's straightforward and very simple. You have a Chiefs offense that's passing the ball at a ridiculous rate. Number one in pass rate over expectation. Those passes, especially on early downs, are uber efficient. If you look at all passes on early downs this season, Kansas City is delivering a positive 0.21 EPA per dropback. It's number one in the NFL. No other team has a 2 in front of their name. The Raiders are dead last in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency. Defense takes effort, and there's really nothing to play for on that side of the ball. It's also a massive step up in class. Most situations are when you're facing Patrick Mahomes, but you just look at the last 4 weeks. The Raiders have faced Mac Jones, Kenny Pickett, Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield. And I think
dare you trash Brock Purdy and everything he's done for the 49ers over the last couple of weeks?
Oh, he's been fantastic, but you get my point.
I know where
right?
you're going with that. He's not quite Patrick Mahomes yet.
The other thing here, and you touched on it at the top, and I'm not sure if it was the intent, right? It's a long shot. Mahomes needs the 429
It's the Raiders. Hold on a
yards.
second.
He needs the touchdowns.
It's the Raiders' defense. It's not a long shot.
Right. It is, right? But my point here is, like, you could see a situation where, when you're betting a total and you just need that one last possession to be meaningful for the Chiefs, even though they're up 10, this kind of puts you in that situation where it's like, hey, Patrick Mahomes is about 68 yards away from this record. I know we're up 10 and the quarter's flipping from the third to the fourth. That's the incentive to not be hand it off, let's get out of Dodge, move on to the next, right? It's in sight. And as long as it's in sight, you might get that added possession from a Kansas City offense in the situation where, hey, they might be up 10 at that point. There's really no reason to stress the defense and incur added risk. You might see it in this spot, and if you can buy another possession, that might be all you need to get. Well,
and the reason for that optimism, obviously, when you look at Patrick Mahomes, he's got the best record in division games, 26-3 by any quarterback since 1970, with a minimum of 20 starts, and those numbers get exponentially better against the Raiders. 8-1 in his career against the Silver and Black, over 315 passing yards per game, a 26-3 touchdown interception ratio, and in the games he's played on the road against the Raiders, 4-0, 373 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, 1 interception. The Chiefs have scored 28-plus points in all 9 of those games. And when you talk about chasing history with Mahomes, if he ends up winning the MVP, and he is a massive favorite to do so, can be the 10th player in NFL history to win multiple MVP awards. He can be the 3rd youngest player at the time of their 2nd MVP, and he would be the first player ever to win 2 MVPs and a Super Bowl MVP in his 20s, currently sitting at 27. So obviously a lot of historical precedent to be set there. It is interesting when you look at how these numbers have basically been accumulated. It's arguably one of the quietest, best seasons we've seen from a quarterback because there's so many other guys garnering headlines.
Yes. I think that's kind of something we referenced a few weeks back. It's that Patrick Mahomes is his own worst enemy, right? It's that he's just set the bar so high that when he reaches it or slightly exceeds it, no one's paying attention. No one's talking about it. But what he's doing this year in terms of overall offensive success rate with the loss of Tyreek Hill, putting up better numbers than 2021, you're seeing why he's leaking out for MVP. Obviously, Jalen Hurts going down. You didn't have the Monday night matchup conclude where you could have had writers saying, the battle of that game would have propelled Burrow or Josh Allen to that leader role in the MVP race, but those things haven't unfolded. So at this point, a lot of the sharper guys in the betting space that writers follow are now understanding what Patrick Mahomes is doing. And then you have those 2 situations that unfolded Monday, and then obviously Jalen Hurts not playing.
And by the way, for the record, it's not a leak in the MVP market. It is a full-blown flood right now for what you're seeing as far as where those numbers are headed.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty
now?
much that case.
What was earlier this week? It was like a $6 favorite.
I've seen prices upwards of $9 now in the wake of what we saw on full Monday.
Gotcha.
So
yep.
Number trending one way. Incredible to think that you could have had Mahomes at plus 150, but right before Jalen Hurts was ruled out each of the last 2 games. But
Yeah, 3 weeks ago.
But a fun game to watch. Obviously, plenty of fireworks should be on full display. And the Chiefs, no stranger to this time slot. They played the Denver Broncos in this same role last year on the Saturday. Credit to the league for showcasing arguably the best talent at the quarterback position. Into the Saturday night game, a winner-go-home type scenario. Obviously, there come with a couple of caveats that the Jags could backdoor themselves into the playoffs, even with a loss if things broke the right way. And a spot I don't think any of us believe we would be in 6-8 weeks ago with the Jaguars and Titans fighting for the divisional crown. And right now, you're looking at Jacksonville, a 6-point home favorite. It's down a touch from where this number opened at 6.5, even a 7 that was out there. The total up a touch as well from that 38.5, 39 opener that we've seen. The winner of the game determines the AFC South champion. The Jaguars, bunch of scenarios. They do win with a tie. They do get in with a tie, and there's some scenarios where, they can get in even with the loss. The Titans are seeking their third straight division title, would match the longest streak in team history with the 1960-62 Oilers. Meanwhile, the Jaguars are seeking their fourth division title in franchise history, most recently winning in 2017. And when you talk about these two teams trending in very different directions, the Titans have lost 6 straight since starting the season 7-3, joining only the 94 Eagles in NFL history to lose 6 straight after starting 7-3. An 0-8 record versus current playoff teams this season, a far cry from where they were last year, where they had an NFL record 8 wins versus teams that finished with a winning record. Meanwhile, the Jaguars, winners of 5 of their last 6 after starting 3-7, would join the 2020 Washington Commanders as the only team in NFL history to reach playoffs after starting 3-7. Payne, I found this nugget pretty telling, and I think it'll obviously be salt in the wound for Jaguars fans. The Jaguars' upcoming matchup against the Titans will be the team's first primetime game on a day other than Thursday since a Monday Night Football game in December of 2011. If there's a stat that highlights how irrelevant they have been for the most part year in, year out, I think that's the perfect illustration. But when you look at this game, we can say what we want about the Jags and the way they're trending. The NFL did them no favors. A massive, and I mean massive, rest advantage working in favor of Tennessee despite traveling on the road, trying to exact a measure of revenge against a divisional foe that beat them in their own building 36-22.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, it was like the old banana in the tailpipe there. It's like, hey, we're going to give you the primetime game, but we're going to stick it in your buttocks in the process. I mean, this is the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. I mean, there was
competitive balance. The league sets competitive balance.
It should have been Lions
100%.
Packers in this spot. That way, that game wasn't influenced by Rams Seahawks. Just utter stupidity. And they can say that it's all about competitive balance, and it's clearly not. It's a financial decision. Like we're on to the scheme.
You've uncovered the mystery, Watson. Hell of a sleuthing job you've done over there.
So this is really going to be a fun game because it's not just prime time, but this is effectively a playoff game, as you alluded to, right? There's ways Jacksonville can get in, but they need 9 other things to happen. So it's very much, win and get in, and spend some time breaking down both sides of this because threw a few shekels into the market on this one. But I think we maybe touch on the Titans first in terms of like offensively what they're doing. There's been some speculation that Malik Willis might see some action here, and they're trying to throw Jacksonville off the scent that it's Dobbs. And for me, maybe there's a package or two. I just don't see it. I think ultimately the Titans are pretty smart with some of the decisions that they make, and Malik Willis to this point is very unplayable. He's not a quarterback that we liked at the college level. He certainly played well at Liberty when he was going up against defenses in his own class, but when he would even play poor Power 5 defenses, not the greatest results. I mean, stubbed his toe last year at Ole Miss. I just didn't see it. And he doesn't even look overly athletic at this level either, which is pretty wild to see, but it doesn't appear that way. Anyways, he's got a QBR of 12 this season. Malik Willis is quarterback 48 out of 48 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation among quarterbacks with at least 100 snaps. So this is why the move happened. This is why we saw Dobbs on Thursday night, to kind of get him acclimated. And he's no world beater, right? But he got his feet wet against a pretty solid Cowboys defense in prime time, saw live bullets, got acclimated to the new receivers and linemen, and now he's got 17 days in a pretty straightforward system. And I think the one thing, if you're not in tune with Josh Dobbs, very smart kid, right? Aerospace engineer. Spent a couple off seasons working at NASA.
Legitimate rocket scientist.
Very straightforward. Yes. Like, I think he's going to be able to pick up more of the offense with another like week plus. And I think there's things that Tennessee will do with Dobbs that obviously haven't been put on film yet. And so my feeling is with his knowledge, a week plus, like there's going to be some things here where he's going to not only have the full playbook, but we're going to see something a little bit different than Dallas saw. And I think the positive, when you look at the Titans offense and for Dobbs specifically, like you're dropping down in class against Jacksonville's defense. And I think we mentioned this and outlined it specifically heading into that Thursday night game at the Jets. Jacksonville's defense was trending poorly for a massive stretch. They got out of the gates hot, right? 8th best defense through 5 weeks. But from week 6 onward, the Jaguars fell off a cliff. They were 31st in schedule adjusted defensive efficiency leading up to that Jets game. Only the Bears had been worse over that time frame. They're also dead last in pass efficiency since week 6 as well. And then, you just kind of look at what's transpired the last 2 weeks. Like, I'm not going to be bamboozled here by a weather game against Zach Wilson.
Good usage of the word bamboozled, by the way.
And then you have, a tanking Houston team where Jeff Driscoll's getting snaps. Like, those aren't going to be the barometers for me for Jacksonville's defensive improvement the last 2 weeks. So that's kind of how my mindset here is. You also have Derrick Henry with 14 days off to rest. We kind of had mentioned, a month ago, him dealing with a little bit of a foot injury. I think that's huge, getting Derrick Henry this added time off. And you even go back to that week 14 matchup against Jacksonville. Henry ran really well, 17 for 121. Very efficient, more than 3 yards per rush attempt over expectation. The Titans had the 5th best EPA per rush that week. When you remove Henry's fumbles in the rain, Henry just got scripted out of the game because the Titans were trailing. Jacksonville does a very poor job tackling, 6th most missed tackles in the league. Overall, they've graded out 30th in tackling, and last check, Derrick Henry's pretty tough to tackle once he gets going. So I think this is interesting from the standpoint where, listen, Tennessee's offense isn't going to put up a gargantuan number here, right? But I think there's some paths here, and I know Tennessee's offensive line isn't in great shape. If you look at that and keeping all things fair, Aaron Brewer is the only offensive lineman that started game 1 this season that will start here, and that has caused some inconsistencies for Derrick Henry in the rush attack. But I'd fully expect Jacksonville to load the box like they did in the first matchup, right? Make Dobbs beat them. That was the plan in week 14 as well. It's just a little bit tougher to implement here. I know Treylon Burks was limited at practice, but he missed that game with a concussion. So it's not going to be as easy to implement that, right? And again, Dobbs is by no means awesome, but he can at least throw a football. Malik Willis can't. And Dobbs built a decent rapport with Robert Woods on Thursday night. If Treylon Burks is at 100%, and I do think he plays in this one, there's probably some areas to attack there. The Jaguars have allowed the 5th most receiving yards as well to tight ends. So no reason not to get Hooper and Chig involved in the play action pass game. Jacksonville's also dealing with, some injuries to their front 7. Walker and Fatu will play but are less than 100%. We saw Dwayne Smoot tore his Achilles in that Jets game. So the Jags D-line isn't in the best shape either. But I think the key here is get out early, get out relatively fast, be aggressive early, score some points so Henry doesn't get scripted out. And that's the one thing that we've seen with the Titans here, Todd, right? The script and game plans have actually been good, and you can see it in the efficiency metrics. The Titans are 7th in EPA per play in the first quarter, 10th in the first half of games. But in the second half, dead last 32nd in EPA per play. So you got to get out quickly here because that's when you do your best scoring. That's your best approach to not having Derrick Henry.
And you mentioned Derrick Henry. Look, in his career against the Jags, over 1,200 rushing yards in 12 meetings, averaging north of 105 yards per contest. They're riding a streak overall of 3 straight 100-yard games. The biggest question for Henry has been ball security recently. A pair of fumbles lost versus the Jags. He's fumbled 4 times in his last 3 games, losing 3 of them, one massive impressive against the Houston Texans that swung that game. But you talk about EPA and some of the scoring numbers for the Tennessee Titans, Payne. I mean, you look at their overall body of work, 17.5 points per game this season, 28th in the NFL, would be the third fewest points per game by a playoff team since 2000, matching that of the 2005 Chicago Bears and the 2016 Houston Texans. That EPA in the second half that you referenced, 5.7 points per game in the second half, fewest by any team since the 2014 49ers. They have yet to score 28 points in a game this season. Only 5 teams since the NFL-AFL merger have reached the playoffs without scoring 28-plus points in a game. So it puts things in perspective about how poor they've been offensively. And we can flip the script because all the questions we have about the Jaguars' defense, their offense has masked a lot of those deficiencies. As a quarterback that we were critical of early in the year, who's really come of age working under Doug Peterson's tutelage so far this year. And you look at the Jags' attack. They've been able to run the ball. They've been able to throw it. The Tennessee Titans are good in one regard on the defensive side. They're stout against the run. It's going to put the burden of proof on Trevor Lawrence, and we'll see if the Titans can generate a pass rush or if their secondary can hold up, something that they haven't been able to do in recent weeks.
You know, I think what's interesting here is you kind of referenced Trevor Lawrence there. And, you know, because we implemented the college podcast, I don't think there's anyone that's been higher on Trevor Lawrence's talent. Hell, I mean, go back to the preseason. One of the best bet props was under 14.5 interceptions on Trevor Lawrence. I like Trevor Lawrence. We were just waiting for his balls to drop and him become a man, right? That when something negative would happen, that his body language and demeanor didn't permeate throughout the rest of that team. And you could just see it. We thought it would be a good match with Doug Peterson. And I can tell you, and when I told you pre-podcast where we had the Jaguars power rated, you kind of chuckled a little bit. But I don't think there's been anyone higher on Jacksonville. We just knew what this team could do if Trevor Lawrence acted like an adult a little bit more when he made a mistake. And so far, he's starting to do that during this recent stretch. And I think this side of the matchup's pretty straightforward. I mean, you look at some of the injuries, and I know other people will say different things about how, you know, there are no injuries based upon guys that aren't on the IR. Like, Bud Dupree, Zach Cunningham, Harold Landry, Deshaun Hand, Caleb Farley, Elijah Molden, and David Long Jr. That's the list of Titans defensive players that are either out for the season or still on IR as first thing Wednesday morning. All those guys were expected to be key contributors this season for Tennessee's defense. Jeffrey Simmons is going to play because he's an absolute bulldog, but he's not 100%. Amani Hooker hasn't played since week 14. He's questionable. Only got a limited practice in on Tuesday and Wednesday. Christian Fulton hasn't played since week 13 and is questionable. Only got a limited in on Tuesday and Thursday. So those are two more starters in the Titans secondary when healthy. So we're going to have to keep an eye on those two guys leading up to Saturday. But past that, right? I mean, past the defense just being ravaged by injury, I think you have a smart head coach here and Doug Peterson that we really respect because he knows how to attack defenses. He knows how to attack his opponent. And he knows how to attack this style of Titans defense, right? I mean, the most infamous example is the 2018 Super Bowl with Foles against Belichick. But the matchup against Vrabel a few weeks back, even though the Jaguars are double-digit, with a double-digit lead in the second half, Trevor Lawrence threw it 42 times, double the amount of carries both Etienne and Hasty had combined, right? So it's like they know how to attack defenses properly. And it's pretty obvious here, right? I mean, the Titans defense 28th in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency, and it's probably worse if, Hooker doesn't play and Christian Fulton doesn't play. But they're second against the run. The Titans are literally the most extreme pass funnel defense on paper this season. So this is going to be a pass funnel offense, I would assume, for the Jaguars. The Titans really have not shown an ability to defend boundary receivers. Their problems defending the slot the past few seasons hasn't been as bad this year, but they're still bottom 10 in yards per target to slot receivers. And you think about two guys in that Jaguar receiving room, right, that are not just chomping at the bit for a playoff push here, but they're guys that we know quite well, Todd. Zay Jones is 2 catches and 98 yards away from 750,000.
Nice chunk of change.
Christian Kirk needs 2 catches for a $500K bonus. So, where those guys line up and the incentives they have would probably depict decent games from them. Now, I'm sure Vrabel's going to have a wrinkle or two to counter the things that work so well in Week 14 for Jacksonville. But sometimes when you're just like that injured, you don't have the chess pieces to make the necessary adjustments. I mean, the reason Evan Ingram had a career day is just because of the matchup, right? It's injuries, it's matchup. I mean, the Titans have allowed the third highest reception rate to tight ends and the most yards per game. And we saw it again on Thursday night, right? Dalton Schultz, 7 catches, 2 touchdowns. They haven't been able to defend the tight end position either. They're not great defending the slot, although slightly improved, and they're not good defending boundary receivers. So you have this pass funnel attack that's just going to be passing the ball, and the weather conditions are substantially better than what they faced on that rainy day in Tennessee. It's just tough to not think Jacksonville is going to score some points here based upon their aggressiveness, based upon the matchup. Now you could have a situation where, Simmons is back, Autry is back, and you get a little bit of pressure. We know Jacksonville's down a tackle, right? So that maybe gives Tennessee some hope, but I think Jacksonville's going to score some points here, and I think Tennessee's offense is better than perception.
It'll be very interesting to see what kind of unique wrinkles, to your point, Mike Vrabel can scheme up. He knows man for man there isn't enough talent on that Tennessee Titans defense. I can only hope for Titans fans that their game plan is a little bit tighter than what we saw from Michigan in their college football playoff semifinal game, where Coach Harbaugh realized, I'm just going to blitz the house every play and hope for the best. I think Mike Vrabel will have a few unique wrinkles for a young quarterback, but a massive game and potential for him to come of age on one of the football's biggest stages with an improbable playoff run, knowing that Tennessee Titans at one point this season were roughly 1-20 favorites to win the AFC South.
And then you have some narrative stuff, right? Like maybe this game becomes too much for Trevor Lawrence and a lot of those young guys who haven't played in meaningful games. Like we did see them get to a point in the season where it started getting talked about a lot. Some big games started happening and they fell flat. That's probably the only way Jacksonville doesn't show well here, is at the moment just appears too large. But man, I mean, there are not a ton of things here that make you completely fearful of this matchup unless Vrabel just dials up something absolutely awesome with a bunch of pawns, basically, right? Like I don't know if he's got the full toolbox here of defensive weapons to implement some of the things that he would ultimately like to do.
And the final note that I'll add on this game, when you look at historical precedent, albeit every game is a snowflake in the grand scheme of things from a trend standpoint, the Tennessee Titans, they've been underdogs 15 times over the last couple of seasons of 5 points or more. The Titans are 11-4 against the spread, 8-7 straight up in that particular role. Meanwhile, the Jaguars, of course, it comes with the caveat, all of these games weren't started by Trevor Lawrence, have been a favorite 7 times over the last 3 seasons, just 1-6 straight up in ATS, more than a 4-point favorite once all year. They lost that game outright to the Houston Texans.
We have seen money on the Titans, obviously. Right? I mean, I don't know if my number gets me there. I think we were kind of all hoping for 7. Was that kind of the sentiment?
Yeah,
there,
I think
Todd?
so, and it just never got there. It was 6.5 and got smacked out of the market.
Yeah.
You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod, and a special Friday college football playoff championship game preview coming to you, a little bit unorthodox. So make sure you mark your calendars after you get through all of the NFL breakdowns. That will have some additional content to get you through the weekend in anticipation of the big game between Georgia and TCU. From Saturday, Payne, into Sunday slate, and we can start things off in the Steel City, a game that I don't think any of us had circled 6 to 8 weeks ago, thinking it was going to have any meaning as far as the NFL playoffs were concerned. But here we are with the Pittsburgh Steelers, a 2.5-point home favorite, welcoming in the Cleveland Browns. Total on the game sits at 40. And the Steelers, well, they're going to need a little bit of help. They can clinch a playoff berth with a win and losses by the Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots, looking to clinch a 7 seed, needing help from other teams in Week 18 for the second consecutive season. Meanwhile, the Steelers, they've won 18 straight regular season home games versus the Browns. They did lose in the 2020 postseason with the Baker Mayfield Bowl against Big Ben, where they were down, felt like 37-0 in the blink of an eye. We know about the history that's at stake here, regardless if the Steelers punch their ticket to the playoffs. Mike Tomlin, 18 straight non-losing seasons, third longest streak in the Super Bowl. 15 straight non-losing seasons, 18 for the franchise overall. Meanwhile, the Cleveland Browns, they remain the model of futility. They've now missed the playoffs in 19 of the past 20 seasons. The lone appearance was the aforementioned 2020 shot, where they did go on the road and came up just short against Kansas City. Keep in mind that they do not own a 2023 first-round pick, as that was part of the collateral they traded to the Texans for Deshaun Watson. Payne, I don't know if this game warrants a full deep dive. Obviously, the Pittsburgh Steelers, two improbable comebacks in recent weeks with that late touchdown against the Las Vegas Raiders on Christmas Eve, and then, of course, following it up with a second-half comeback last weekend against the heated division rival in the Baltimore Ravens. But we've seen the Steelers raise their level of play since TJ Watt came back. Offensively, they're doing just enough, and last weekend, full marks to their tandem of running backs. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris answered the bell with the sheer volume of touches that they had in that game against the Ravens defensive front. But when you look at this game and try and handicap an element, I guess we can start with the number on this game. Fair or foul with the Pittsburgh Steelers, a 2.5-point home favorite.
So the first thing that isn't as improbable as it would appear initially is the Steelers' path to the playoffs. I mean, you need a Dolphins loss. It's a game that's moved 5.5 points this week, and all signs are pointing towards Skylar Thompson starting that game. And then, a game we'll touch on here in a little bit in Buffalo and New England, but, about a 7.25 favorite there, the Bills are. And so, the path isn't completely insurmountable, but I think in terms of price, right, it's very clear the Browns have taken respected money. And I know the group responsible for that. And then there were some guys that got wind of that information or tailed that information and, took 3 minus 20 and 3 minus 30 or whatever the price points they entered the market at. And so that's why we're down to 2.5 here. So for me, now that we're off the 3, the option would be an advantage teaser through the 3 and the 7 with a total at 40 on the Browns, right? That's kind of my thought process there. And the vibe at 3 is like, who have the Steelers beat? It's Matt Ryan, who's old and been benched twice. It's Mariota, who's been benched. It's Tyler Huntley, a backup, who they've faced twice now. It's Sam Darnold and that perception of Sam Darnold, even though he's playing substantially better now. It's Derek Carr, who was recently benched. So kind of like a peel behind the curtain of how a lot of betting groups operate and pro bettors that provide content. We just really put up emphasis on schedule, right? Who you play, how you actually play them. It's kind of the easiest path to finding value if you can spot the anomaly. And you're finding value because something that's unfolded in a great way might be aided by something. And I think that's the mindset, is the Steelers have very much benefited from playing poor quarterbacks. Their defense has been the beneficiary of playing those poor quarterbacks and is wildly overvalued. That's kind of the mindset here. The other sentiment is that guys want to be ahead of the curve on Deshaun Watson in the Browns offense. Deshaun got his feet wet. He's now making his 6th start. 4 of his prior 5 starts are against damn good defenses in Cincinnati, Baltimore, New Orleans, and Washington, all top 13 defenses in schedule-adjusted efficiency. And then to add to that, lots of crap weather situations for Cleveland's offense playing at home recently. All of that I agree with. But why it's only a Browns teaser for me at this point are a few reasons. I don't necessarily love the matchup. You kind of referenced it at the top in that Pittsburgh's offense has surged a little bit. It's a reference point that we made in breaking down last week's game and then providing, a best bet that included Pittsburgh. It's that the Steelers right now, 11th in offensive efficiency post-bye. They were 24th in offensive efficiency before their bye. They showed extremely well again last week, to your point, against a damn good Ravens defense. I know they were missing some pieces, right? Campbell, you had the corner out. They finished with the 5th best EPA last week, Pittsburgh did. And it's because they could pound the football. 67% of runs graded successful against Baltimore. Pittsburgh had the 5th best rushing EPA of the week. And you look at the Browns defensively, still bottom 5 in the league defending the run. So that scares me a little bit. The other thing, and I watched it live. I went back before bed last night and watched it because you saw the same thing I saw. And it's that the idea Deshaun Watson played well last week against Washington is somehow going to catapult into a great performance here, and it could happen. Listen, right? It's a 1-game, 60-minute sample. Anything could happen. But damn, that might have been the worst performance ever for a QB that threw 3 touchdown passes and had 0 interceptions. 9 for 18. 2 of the touchdowns are blown coverages. 1 is a 9-yard out route where a DB whiffs a tackle and it's nothing but yak from Amari Cooper after the fact. Watch that game. Deshaun still looks uncomfortable. Form doesn't look great. Ball still coming out of his hands a little weird at times. He looks tentative. Doesn't look as athletic as we've seen in years past. Doesn't always see the open man. And for a mobile quarterback, he delivered a 32 QBR last week, which is below his 37 QBR on the season. So I didn't see the progress that one would see just looking at a generic box score on ESPN, seeing, hey, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. It didn't look that clean to me. And we had a situation where, yes, Washington is very good defensively, but part of the weakness early on in the season was their secondary, and 2 of the key cogs responsible for the growth in the secondary, and St. Juice and Cameron Curl, both didn't play last week for Washington. So I didn't quite get the vibe that the Browns offense were as good as, hanging 24 on the road against Washington. 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. It just didn't look that way. The other thing you have to keep your eyes peeled for here is Jack Conklin and Denzel Ward were both DNPs Wednesday and not for rest. We'll have to monitor those situations. 2 very crucial players. I like the Browns, just not at 2.5. Lost too much value coming off the 3. So for me, it's an advantage teaser or pass on the Browns.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, and talking about 2 key contributors, they're not just also-rans in terms of their starters. I mean, Denzel Ward, the top cover corner, him potentially being out creates a real problem if they're unable to generate pressure on Kenny Pickett, knowing how good Deontay Johnson and George Pickens have been in spurts. Now, Myles Garrett obviously said we live for this to try and play spoiler against a divisional rival. It's great in theory. As soon as you go down double digits, potentially, what's that energy and effort look like? So be fascinating game to watch. As you said, not as improbable as we think for the Steelers to get in. You do rough math there. They're about plus 310 on the Steelers trio of legs that it would take for them to get into the playoffs. Obviously not backing out the juice, an implied probability of in that 21 to 25% range. But we may as well stay in the same division though, Payne, with the Ravens and Bengals, and then we can get into the Patriots-Bills game. When you're looking at the Ravens and Bengals, obviously we know the storylines around this particular football game. The Bengals, a 7-point favorite in this one. Total 41.5 to 42, kind of scattered throughout the market. The Bengals, they can clinch the AFC North title with a win or a tie. Impact of loss depends on, circumstances beyond their control. It appears by all intents that the Bengals have an inside track to being division champions. When you look at the Ravens, fewest points per game scored at 11.8 and allowed at 12.2 since week 13. When Lamar Jackson left that game with an injury, the Ravens have combined for 30 or fewer points in 5 straight games. It's actually the longest streak since the 2005-2006 Denver Broncos did it 8 times. The Ravens, first team with a winning record in a 5-game span with fewer than 60 points since the 2011 Kansas City Chiefs. And when you look at the Ravens, 5 straight games with 17 or fewer points. It's the longest streak for the franchise since 2005-2006. You referenced some of those defensive injuries that they dealt with on Sunday Night Football against the Steelers. Marcus Peters and Calais Campbell, the 2 that you're going to want to keep tabs on. Peters returned to practice. Calais Campbell, they're saying, has a chance to play. But Payne, Ravens fans, bettors, NFL writers, you can say what you want. We've all kept waiting and waiting, thinking that Lamar Jackson was going to put on the Superman cape, make the triumphant return for Week 18, and then we find out on Wednesday he wasn't at practice. He's a DMP Week 14, Week 15, Week 16, and 17, and the reality of it is he's now missed a slew of games, 8 out of the last 20, and he hasn't been able to finish the regular season either this year or last.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where we want to go with this game. I think we were kind of under the impression with Lamar not even getting in any limiteds last week and Lamar in a little bit of a contract dispute. His value only increases as the offense struggles. And so I would guess he's back for a meaningful playoff game. We'll see. Tyler Huntley also a little bit nicked up. We broke this game down in full detail last time, and there's some things defensively that both coordinators do quite well that give these offensive troubles. But the elephant in the room here is that there's situations, and we're only really discussing this game because of perceptually what it means, right? From the onset, this game was designed that win the division kind of vibe. And now it's looking more likely that Buffalo and Cincinnati isn't going to be replayed, and you're going to use win percentages for seeding, and Buffalo is a 7.5 point favorite-ish, and if they go and beat the Patriots, then there's really no incentive for the Bengals to do anything here because they would be locked into the 3, and that would put a situation where the Ravens and Bengals are playing each other again next week. So what are we putting on film? There's a lot of weird stuff going on with this game, and then we talked off air a little bit and some of the comments that have been made throughout the Bengals locker room. Some of those guys obviously still distraught at what transpired on Monday evening, and you had the quote, but Burrow was effectively, I
have it here because I know we did mention it, and Burrow, who was asked about where the Bengals were as a team, and this is verbatim from an article talking about where the team is from a mindset standpoint. I'm sure if you polled the locker room, there would be mixed votes on that. Personally, I think playing is going to be tough, but there's people that want to play too, and there's people that don't. Personally, I probably want to play. I think getting back to as normal as you can, as fast as you can, is personally how I kind of deal with these kinds of things. But like I said, everyone has a different way of dealing with it. Burrow then added that the team has been preparing as usual for Sunday's game, but that it remains a scary, emotional time for everyone involved. Unfortunate as it is, we got a game to play on Sunday, he said. It's our job to get out there and execute and play the game the way that we need to play it to go and win. It is what it is. So I'm not going to play amateur psychologist. I didn't go to college to get a degree in any of that, but this tells me these are the kind of things under normal circumstances when a team's leader is saying this to the press about an upcoming game in the NFL. These are the kind of things that you look to bet against because you feel the opponent has an intangible edge.
And that was kind of the vibe initially where I was hearing Ravens could be the side. And all of a sudden, Tyler Huntley is a little dinged up himself. And this kind of correlation to, Tyler Huntley dinged up, no Lamar, Bengals offensive guys, specifically T. Higgins, maybe still a little distraught, and we've seen some under money come in here. And then in the scenario that I outlined where the two teams could be facing each other again in the first round of the playoffs, maybe you get some vanilla-based things. And so that was kind of the cause for this to come off the 43. The other element here, and we talked about it at the top, is the correlation and the variance to some of these things. And if the Bengals were to win, it then makes Chargers-Broncos pretty much moot, where the Chargers are going to be the 5 seed no matter what. There isn't a real need to run Justin Herbert and a lot of those starters out there. And so that's why you've seen that game come crashing down from like Chargers minus 3.2 to now Broncos minus 2. And so we've seen some correlated parlays, some correlated teasers on Broncos to Bengals because of some of those situations where the league just did a horrific job scheduling these games, where pro bettors have kind of taken advantage of that. So, we're trying to break these games down, but sometimes the matchups might not be as relevant in situations like this.
Exactly right.
So we're kind of trying to give the viewpoint of these games and how the market's attacked and why it's been moving and what pro bettors are doing, and it doesn't necessarily correlate to being like, the Ravens have not been good against boundary receivers, and T. Higgins could have a day here. So that's kind of how we wanted to break this one down. I think it maybe correlates a little bit into the Patriots Bills if you want to lead us there, or you want to put a bow tie in anything specific.
No,
to
and I think that's a great point. You can look at the X's and O's until you're blue in the face, but if you're not building in all of the different elements that go into the handicap, you're not doing yourself a service in terms of trying to figure out where the market's going to go, the kind of things that you need to be considering before walking to the window to place a bet. You mentioned that Broncos-Chargers game. Lo and behold, we have a little bit of Chargers money entering the market, some of the 2.5s turning into 1.5s at a couple of the shops out there. So clearly something you're going to want to monitor as well. well, because there is that increased level of interconnectedness with the Bengals and Ravens game going early at 1:05 Eastern, and the Chargers and Broncos game not slated to kick off until 4:25 Eastern instead. You mentioned that Patriots-Bills game, and honestly, this game isn't up everywhere in the market now, only a handful of shops, and you're seeing prices, we'll call 7 kind of the consensus. There are a couple 7.5s out there, with the Buffalo Bills obviously as a home favorite. Total in the game 42.5, and the Patriots, plain and simply, are in with a win. They're seeking their 20th playoff appearance. And especially for Coach Belichick, 18 with New England and 1 with the Cleveland Browns, would pass Don Shula for the most by a head coach in NFL history. That wasn't for the Patriots franchise, that of course for Belichick. First time in his career, he finds himself in this kind of win and you're in type scenario. Only Pittsburgh has had more winning seasons than New England since 1970 with 38. Meanwhile, the Bills, we know that they need a little bit of help elsewhere if they're going to secure the number 1 seed. We know what we saw earlier this year where the Bills went on the road in a very workmanlike performance, dispatched New England in prime time with a 24-10 result. But instead of the X's and O's, Payne, maybe peel back the curtain a little bit about how professional bettors may be looking to attack this contest and the questions we have about Buffalo and their ability to get ready to play in the wake of what they saw their teammate go through on Monday night.
You referenced the prior matchup, and it's a good data point because the Patriots really haven't played to their rating when they step up in class, specifically on the defensive side. New England's offense has struggled against elite defenses, and they've really struggled over the last month or so. That's what we're seeing. Even last week against a beaten and battered Dolphins secondary, there wasn't a ton through the air. I figured that would be a little bit better of a matchup through the air for New England, and it just really couldn't take advantage of that. But this game does come with a ton of variance, right? Unfortunate situation, but even as we sit here, talking Thursday morning, there are Buffalo players that are still back in Cincinnati. And then yesterday, the vibe was that Buffalo was just going to be doing walkthroughs and meetings this week, and there was no media availability again. And, late last night, got a text message that said it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that if Kansas City won on Saturday, there would be a slight chance that Buffalo may consider forfeiting this game. We'll see if that ultimately unfolds, but the vibe here is Patriots win and get in. This is one of the few situations where there are some 7.5s out there. The must win isn't being fully factored into this price. In a perfect situation with 100% pristine health for Buffalo, our true number is 9. There's some teaser implications there, obviously, but at 7.5 some places, really wasn't a ton of value lost when you think about the situation that's unfolding, where Buffalo clearly and understandably isn't entrenched mentally here. And if you're just doing walkthroughs and you're just kind of doing meetings, the one guy that's certainly preparing at full levels is Bill Belichick, and that becomes a pretty difficult task if you're not putting the same time, effort, and energy in that Bill Belichick is. And so this is very much one of those, speaking to guys, asymmetric risk type of bets where, if Buffalo decides to play, how much higher can this number get? And if there's situations where, hey, they just don't seem fully entrenched, this line's only going one way. And it would not completely shock me in the least that, if you're listening to this breakdown on Friday or Saturday, we're not talking about a 7.5 or even a 7 in this market.
Yeah, that's the reality of it when you look at all the factors that go into the handicap of this kind of game. Again, much like we said for the Bengals, it's not all X's and O's. It's trying to figure out what the level of motivation, the engagement. These are still humans out there that have gone through major trauma with one of their colleagues, and you can understand completely why football may not be front of mind in any capacity, knowing that the game means considerably more to the New England Patriots, and for Buffalo, their season won't be defined by winning this football game on Sunday. It can be in terms of how they perform during the playoffs when they have a chance to regroup, collect their thoughts, and move forward with that, knowing that their primary focus most likely is on the health of Damar Hamlin, who appears to be trending in a positive direction, but still very much in a fight to try and remain maintain some normalcy and stability given the traumatic experience on Monday night. So a lot to factor in there. We know, like we said at the top of the show, it's about betting markets. It's trying to glean an edge wherever you can, and it's not to be morbid or anything else all along those lines. You try and factor in all the elements and arrive at an investment wherever you can try and find an edge. From all the games we'll see unfold on Sunday throughout the course of the day into the Sunday night football game, and you kind of reference it, Payne, in the ideal world, this would be the game we were watching Saturday night. So you would see both of these teams treat it like a winner-go-home type scenario. Green Bay obviously controls their own destiny against the Detroit Lions. Win and they get into the NFC playoffs. The Lions are going to need a little bit of help to have as much on the line when this game kicks off 7:15 from Lambeau Field. And Green Bay in this game, a 4.5-point favorite. Total on the contest is 49. And when you look at the way things have gone so far this season for Green Bay, hey, they've put themselves in a position to even get here. After starting the year 4-8, they've rattled off a number of wins on their own. Detroit stubbed their toe against Carolina, and now, of course, they're going to need a little bit of help. The Lions' last winner-take-all game occurred back in 1997. The Packers' only winner-take-all game was 2013 versus the Chicago Bears, and it was Aaron Rodgers snatching victory from the jaws of defeat with a 48-yard touchdown late to Randall Cobb on 4th and 8 in the final minute. 30 games in NFL history in the final week of the regular season have featured a win and in scenario for both teams, either entering the last week or a kickoff based on earlier results in the day. That nugget comes from Pro Football Focus. And when you look at the Lions, this becomes their first primetime game of the season. The only Thursday they played was the breakfast football on Thanksgiving that we've grown accustomed to. Courtesy of some of my colleagues at CBS, some of these numbers blew me away, Payne. The Lions' playoff probabilities after a 1-6 start, 0.3%. The Green Bay Packers after their 4-8 start, a shade better than 1%. Obviously, those numbers vary based on some of the inputs that you'll put in your model. First meeting saw the Lions win the game 15-9 back in Week 9, one of Aaron Rodgers' worst games of his career. Tied his career high with 3 interceptions, first career game with multiple red zone interceptions, and first multi-interception game versus the division since 2013. But when you look at Green Bay, they have been outstanding against the Lions when they play at Lambeau Field. 27-3 the last 30 meetings, going all the way back to 1992, but they are just 4-3 the last 7 since winning 23 straight. The Lions haven't made the playoffs, meanwhile, when the Packers missed since 1999. Payne, we hear all the time about Jared Goff outside in the elements potentially being a problem. Green Bay trending the right way. Their defense looking like the quote-unquote elite unit we thought they were going to be early in the year. But I think what's amazing about all of this is for Green Bay getting all of these accolades, their offense has been mediocre at best, and we talked about it on Monday. They were extremely fortunate to have a decisive win against the Minnesota Vikings, being gift wrap points early in this game. How do you begin trying to go about handicapping the X's and O's before we even get into the market implications and market entry?
Yeah, I think the Packers' offense hasn't been perfect. Metrically, it looks much better than it does when you watch it unfold on the field. This side of the ball, I think, is where the matchups really matter most, and it just depends on what Aaron Glenn's going to do schematically as the defensive coordinator of the Lions. I mean, Detroit's toyed with some different things scheme-wise this season during their lulls, but if you go back to that Week 9 matchup with these two teams, the Lions played gobs of cover one man. They would load the box. They did so at the 3rd highest rate that week. Detroit was not fearful of the Packers receiving game, so they jammed receivers at the line of scrimmage. They really dared Aaron Rodgers to beat them, and ultimately we saw he couldn't because he was throwing 3 red zone interceptions. But I think if Detroit takes that same approach this week, because it worked last time, and they do play man coverage at the 3rd highest rate in the league, the difference to me this go-round is like Sammy Watkins isn't going to be out there, right? I mean, 81% of the receiver snap share Sammy Watkins had in that game. Dobbs injured early in that game. Cobb didn't play. Christian Watson was still kind of on a milk carton around that time. And so those 3 guys played 18 total snaps against Detroit in Week 9. Christian Watson appears back to full strength this week, was dealing with the hip injury after the Dolphins game, was out there for a bunch of snaps last week, 61%. His best trait is speed, and that speed helps you beat man cover defenses. Christian Watkins' target share is at a top 5 rate against man coverage. The Lions also struggle to defend the slot defensively, and as the season's gone on, we've kind of seen old reliable Randall Cobb be what Aaron Rodgers wants operating in that slot area. So the Packers, to me, are much better equipped to beat this style of defense of the Lions this go-around than they were in Week 9. If the Lions change their approach and play more too high, I don't think that's a big deal because we've seen the Packers decide to run the ball against the Rams and Vikings who use that style, so they'll just fire up the ground game and run it into those light boxes. Detroit was also trending better against the run with some improved D-line play. Last 2 weeks, boy, that's kind of come back to rates where you start to shake your head. I know Deshaun Elliott's out. He's been a big part of that run defense, but did return to practice on Wednesday in a limited role. That's an injury that you're going to want to monitor. But I do think there's some matchups here that bode quite well for the Packers through the air, especially if the Lions elect to go, press man, cover one, and just show their typical rates of man coverage now that it looks like the Packers have the receivers kind of configured in the right manner and they're all healthy this go around. Todd, what do you make of this?
You know what? There's so many different ways to try and be able to figure out the best attack plan and the approach. I mean, two teams obviously, again, didn't think they were going to be here, trying to figure out exactly who gets one of the edges that they can truly take advantage of.
Yeah, I agree with some of those points there. I think the other thing here is, Green Bay offensively is going to do some interesting things there in their attack method of beating that Lions defense. But back to the top, we think the league kind of screwed the pooch again, scheduling this game
insane.
Where they did.
Absolutely insane.
Ultimately,
I still don't get it.
Yeah. It just makes little to no sense. I guess the Packers' brand and Aaron Rodgers is that strong. So, you have that situation where the Lions might find out 40 minutes before kickoff that they're eliminated. And guys that I speak with, the vibe is very much they want the Lions, but at a better price. And they'll get a better price if, the Seahawks, a 6-point home favorite, win earlier in the day. And all the lead up to discussion, for Sunday Night Football is Lions eliminated, Packers winning in. And so that would likely shoot this line to something like Lions +6 in that scenario. And if the Rams are somehow beating the Seahawks, bettors are going to monitor that game closely. And if it's trending in that manner, they'll just grab the 4.5 then as they watch Rams Seahawks. The Lions, I think you mentioned this at the top, have showed pretty well in Lambeau. And recently not as good, but recently very good early in the games. They've been covering the first half number or winning at halftime in 5 straight trips to Lambeau. We actually make this game, and it's going to sound crazy, like Lions-Packers as a pick'em on a neutral if all things are equal. So it would be tough in that situation if the Seahawks were to win and this were to get to 6, where you're not at least having a few shekels on the Lions at that price. The Lions' makeup doesn't really depict giving up, right? Like that's the opposite of the culture that Dan Campbell's built, and Detroit won't know until closer to kick. So the work week is certainly business as usual for the Lions. They're fully vested. Matchup-wise, Detroit wasn't able to do much at home against the Packers defense, but you look in that game, DeAndre Swift, DJ Chark, Jamison Williams, Josh Reynolds, they played a combined 10 snaps Week 9 against Green Bay. The Lions are healthier now in offense. Goff wasn't good in that game. Completion percentage 15% below expectation, third worst of the week. QB 21 out of 27 when you include EPA back in that original week's matchup. The Packers are designed to be better against the pass than the run with their scheme and style. Green Bay still a top 10 defense adjusting for schedule, still a bottom of the barrel run defense. Lions are better passing though. And you mentioned some of the road splits. I know a lot of guys are yelling narrative street. Listen, I think there's obviously something there. And you can kind of just see it, right? Just in something that's very straightforward. You have a California kid that played at Cal, that played for the Rams. Like it's there. What type of adjustment do you make, right? There's a minimal one, right? There's a slight adjustment. I think the other thing here is like the Lions' ground game has to get going, right? That's the way you attack Green Bay's defense, and it's just a little wonky, right? Like Jamal Williams doesn't have the burst. I know he played well last week. He's like 6 yards away from a nice bonus. DeAndre Swift has the burst, but Deuce doesn't really trust him because his vision is poor and he wants to bounce everything. And so even with an elite Lions O-line, Detroit's just an average to slightly above average run offense. So that has to be better in this spot because there's certainly ways that you can attack Green Bay on the ground. That just, you have to be able to run the ball. Detroit has to be better than average on the ground. And you're just looking like 18th in rushing EPA since week 9. It needs to be better there. Again, like for me, the Goff road stuff isn't all narrative. We make a tiny deduction there, but we're getting to the point here where the price is likely going to be wild if Seattle wins. And we talked about it last week, like what is Green Bay? Even in the win last week, they're a positive 1% in net success rate over the Vikings. All right, and give Green Bay credit for the defensive game plan against Minnesota, really holding Justin Jefferson down. But again, it's a 105-yard kickoff return. It's a 75-yard pick six. It's being +4 in turnover differential. So to me, like Green Bay didn't really disprove what we said last week, and they're being puffed up a touch based upon beating the Bears. Although they were down 9 heading into the fourth quarter, right? Beating the Rams in freezing temps at home, beating a reeling Miami team with a concussed quarterback where they could have been down 17 at the half. And then last week, like every variance factor from special teams to turnovers to non-offensive touchdowns swung in Green Bay's favor again.
Yeah, I mean, talk about getting all sorts of breaks. And I know people are comparing this to the Aaron Rodgers-led run where he told everyone to relax, put the team on his back, and went absolutely bonkers. But you look at Aaron Rodgers' numbers, they're actually worse during this win streak than they were during the entire season. They're just getting to be a lot more fortunate. The defense is playing better, and to your point, they're doing it against inferior offenses on a huge level. The biggest thing for me, Payne, in prepping for this game, with the takeaway, not necessarily anything the Packers did defensively, it was that the Vikings couldn't figure out what cleats they needed to wear to go up to Lambeau Field because the players didn't want to wear 7-studded cleats like the training staff told them to. And that just showed me as much as anything else, the Vikings weren't prepared for the football game. Green Bay took advantage. Once Minnesota became one-dimensional, it's a hell of a difficult proposition throwing into the teeth of a Green Bay defense where Jair Alexander is reminding us all why he's truly an elite defensive back.
And it's specifically built to play with elite. This thing's interesting right now. We're like watching this as we're talking about it. It's like starting to leak to 5 some places. And this was another one of those games that we talked about off air a little bit where, you might feel like there's some value on Detroit based upon the number. And again, the price is a little bit ridiculous, but based upon, Seattle being a 6-point favorite, we've heard some guys doing correlated parlays with, right, Seattle to Green Bay. And, there's just different strokes for different folks and how you're attacking these markets as a pro bettor just trying to find the edge, right? Are you just kind of laying back and say, hey, the price is too much. I'm waiting on the Lions. If Seattle wins, and I'm going to grab 6 because I know Dan Campbell's going to have his guys up to snuff, ready to play no matter what. They've been playing a lot of meaningless football for the last few years, and they still tend to show up. So this is one that they've prepared for fully, and they'll find out, 40 minutes before kickoff if they're eliminated or not, but that probably doesn't change the mindset and the approach, and that, hey, we're going home. We are the guys that are going to bite off your leg, and we want to eliminate you in the process as well. So let's just see where this goes. For the people that wanted to run and jump early, it was very much that correlated parlay, Seahawks to Packers. I think the other mindset again is waiting, and if Seattle were to win, then you probably get the loony prices on the Lions based upon lead up of that game being all the talk about how they're eliminated and Green Bay's winning in.
And I mean, I think that's a lot of what we talk about all the time is that it's not the effort and energy teams show on game day. It's what goes into the prep leading up to it as far as focus, is the extra time in the film room, going through playbooks, getting your reps. And I think a 40-minute window, Detroit's not just going to go out there and mail it in. They'll be very much of the mindset like you highlighted there. If they're not going to the playoffs, guess what? A team in their division ain't going either, and they're going to do everything possible to play spoiler. The one final question I did have on this, and there's obviously no perfect answer by any stretch, but always value your opinion on it. If the Seahawks do lose to the Rams, do we think this number can dip as low as 3.5, or will there still be so much? Okay,
yes.
That's all I wanted to know, where you thought the market could go.
I think ultimately what you'll see, and this will be, books are in the same position. We're all going to be watching Rams Seahawks intently, and if it looks like it's going the Rams' way, you're going to start seeing bets on the Lions before that game even concludes.
I hope books keep these numbers up, by the way.
So, well, the reason they would, right, is it's a Sunday night football game. The last thing you want to do as an oddsmaker is take Sunday night football and derail your handle. But if they do take it off the board to make a minor adjustment, like I think it's very quickly. But there could be a situation where, and certainly some books will take this approach where we're just going to adjust, right? And that's the smart way to do this. But ultimately, you're going to have people who do like the Lions watching Rams Seahawks intently, and if it looks like the Rams are extremely game or the Rams are leading in the third quarter, you might start to see those nibbles on the Lions then. If that doesn't transpire, then I think we head in the opposite direction. So it's very much like most markets, very fluid, and you have to be adaptable as a bettor and an investor.
No, it's a great point. Oh, and you can end up with mud on your face, much like I did last year, trying to find the creative way to bet the Raiders-Chargers game in Sunday Night Football while watching the Ravens and Steelers, only to see Pittsburgh come back from the depths of despair, erase those margins, and realize I had a ticket that was going to have the opposite of the CLV we typically look for when it comes to trying to glean an edge.
A guy of your stature is looking for tax write-offs, so we don't feel too bad for you.
You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there. And most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, a little bit of a quirk to the typical Bet the Board schedule. We didn't want to wait until Monday to give you guys a very short runway to listen to our breakdown of the Georgia TCU National Championship. So we're running it right back on Friday, and it wouldn't be a college football podcast about the National Championship if we didn't include our man Brad Power. So be looking at your inbox for all of that. And if you haven't already migrated over, make sure Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the big podcast platforms that are out there. We're going through the Wondery migration. We know there are inevitably going to be a few growing pains, but that's why we tweet out all the shows as well to make sure you guys know when fresh content drops. And if you happen to get bored over the weekend, an archive catalog of plenty of great cardboard chat episodes. Jesse Craig of PWCC, a minority owner, joins Payne Insider every Monday throughout the course of the season to talk about all things trading cards in the industry and why it is a great alternative asset class for those folks that have a passion for sports, much like all of you do when it comes to listening to our eloquent NFL breakdowns. Did I leave anything out as far as housekeeping? This is a little bit unusual for me. I got to get better about keeping my notes and my ducks in a row.
Could use my pillow fluffed. But other than that...
You know what? You got a better chance of me pissing on your pillow than you do me putting a chocolate mint there for you to go to bed at night, all right? So understand how this thing works.
I don't approve that message.
On that note, we do have one final order of business, as is tradition around these parts, and that, of course, is finding the most actionable element on the betting board this weekend. I know it comes with a caveat that Week 18 has a number of challenges and obstacles to navigate over, around, and through, but where do you feel that there's a market worth exploiting as we sit here Thursday morning?
I think what we've kind of discussed throughout this is the market has been beat up pretty good to this point, and there are some guessing games to this point as to like what could transpire in one game and how it impacts another. And again, not trying to be insensitive, but I think in terms of just value situation, grabbing a number here, let's go with 477, the New England Patriots. We've been grabbing 7.5 behind the scenes all morning, and I think we'll just, let's just use 7 as the consensus here. But ultimately, you're having a Patriots team in a must-win situation, but it's not being completely priced as a must-win in the best-case scenario. And our numbers, Buffalo's a 9-point favorite here. And so, again, like grabbing 7.5 this morning, there's still enough out there for you to grab, right? Some PPH stuff, specifically one of our favorites in Ace. But like there are other markets out there, right? Like you're gonna hit a couple shops in Vegas still dealing it. We'll grade it at 7. But ultimately, right, it's just that mindset of where's Buffalo at? They currently have guys that are still in Cincinnati. They're doing walkthroughs this week. There won't be any intensive practices. Meanwhile, you have the ultimate game planner, an ultimate tactician in Bill Belichick in a must-win situation. And again, it's not being priced that way. And so I think there's very much a situation here where we're beating the closing line per usual. And so it makes sense to have some money attached to the Patriots.
Hey, every now and again, opportunities present themselves in unique forms and fashions in the betting market. And to your point, it's not to be callous about the situation the Buffalo community, players at large, the team, the organization has had to go through, but this is a number that will most likely be on the move. And we'd be doing a disservice to all of our loyal listeners if we didn't tell them to grab a price that we think will close substantially lower than the key number there. All right, my good man, covered a lot of ground for Week 18. I know we're all excited for the NFL playoffs. More parity this year than I can ever remember, although those are the famous last words, and we'll watch top overall seeds end up locking horns in Glendale in the middle of February, but should be a wild ride. Just a reminder, too, for those folks who are listening to Bet the Board for the first time and about to embark on the postseason journey with us, we don't do Monday podcasts during the playoffs. There's just not enough to try and discuss. Markets are getting a little bit beat up. Injuries, look-ahead numbers, not quite as relevant this time of year to require Monday listenership. So I know a lot of you will tweet at us asking where a Monday show is. Remember, this week you'll have the college football breakdown, but that'll be available on Friday. And going forward, until they hand out that piece of hardware at the end of the year, we'll be on a Thursday-only schedule with some future announcements about other shows we're adding to the catalog as well. So anything else you'd like to share, Payne, about the best mindset and approach for attacking Week 18?
No, I think that's everything. Shockingly, we've ran longer than most weeks, even though at this point some of these games are a little wonky.
Hey, you want to try and provide as much analysis as you can. We know a lot of our listeners out there competing in bowl pools, trying to figure out how they can get that final 5-0, or bowl pools, excuse me, NFL pools, figure out how they can get that final 5-0, hopefully grab some cash on the side. But best of luck to all of you guys and girls out there with any of your Week 18 investments, and most importantly, with the New England Patriots ticket +7 in hand. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.